The fire roared like a living thing, swallowing the corridors of the Vailith's grace in hungry orange tongues that licked at the ceiling and curled around the twisted metal bones of the starship's belly. Smoke, thick and acrid with the scent of burning polymers and scorched flesh, choked the air, turning every breath into a ragged gasp. Alarms screamed in dying pulses, their red lights flashing like the frantic heartbeat of a dying god. Outside the shattered viewport, the endless dunes of Vexus 9 stretched beneath a bruised sky, two moons hanging low, one pale as bone, the other a blood-orange smudge, waiting to swallow the wreckage whole. Inside, chaos reigned. Bodies lay still in pools of coolant and melted synth plastic. The bridge was a tomb of sparks and silence. But in the deepest cradle of the ship's ruined medbay, beneath a collapsed bulkhead that had once been the royal nursery, Corporal Tarn Vera dragged himself forward on elbows raw and bleeding, his armor cracked and smoking, one leg bent at a sickening angle. In his arms, cradled like the most fragile starlight, was a child, no, not a child, Princess Lysara of the Vailith Dominion, barely breathing. Her skin the deep indigo of twilight over the desert, her long, flowing hair the color of glacial ice, now matted with ash and blood. Her eyes, large and luminous as twin moons, fluttered open for just a second, just long enough to see the human's face, grimed with soot, streaked with tears he didn't know he'd cried, and then rolled back, her breath a whisper lost in the inferno. Tarn didn't know how he'd made it this far. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was a ground pounder, a soldier trained to hold trenches on barren moons, not to run through exploding starships in search of alien royalty. He'd been assigned to escort duty on the Vailith's grace, a political gesture, they'd called it. A human soldier to show goodwill to the Vailith, whose empire spanned 27 star systems and whose warriors could crush a tank with their bare hands. They'd said she was just a girl, a princess in training, sent to Earth for cultural exchange. They hadn't said she was the last heir. They hadn't said the ship would be ambushed by raiders who knew the old hyperspace lanes better than the Vailith themselves. They hadn't said the captain would die screaming as his command chair melted around him. They hadn't said the princess would be alone in the nursery when the first plasma bolt hit. But here she was, and here he was, and the ship was dying. He crawled through the wreckage, dragging his broken leg, using his free hand to claw at fallen beams, his fingers splitting open against sharp edges. He didn't think. He didn't pray. He just moved. 1 inch, then another. The heat pressed against his skin like a furnace door slamming shut. His suit's life support hissed, failing. His vision blurred. He thought of his little sister back on Epsilon 7, how she used to beg him to tell her stories before bed. About heroes who saved dragons, or knights who rode through storms. He'd always told her they were just stories. Now he was the hero, and the dragon was a girl who smelled like ozone and crushed moonflowers. He found a ruptured airlock tunnel, partially sealed by debris. If he could get her outside, if he could just reach the surface, there might be a chance. The desert outside was deadly. Scorching days, freezing nights, sandstorms that could strip flesh from bone. But it was alive. It had water hidden beneath its dunes. It had life. The ship had none. He shoved his shoulder against a fallen girder. It groaned. He screamed, a raw, broken sound that tore from his throat like a beast's last cry, and pushed again. Metal shrieked. Dust rained down. A gap opened. He dragged her through, her body limp, her pulse a thread barely holding. He didn't dare look at her face again. Not yet. Not while he was still moving. Not while he still had strength. Outside, the wind howled like 1,000 lost souls. The twin moons cast eerie, shifting light over the dunes, painting the sand in silver and crimson. The wreckage of the Vailith's grace burned behind them, a funeral pyre against the endless night. Tarn collapsed onto the sand, his body giving out at last. He pulled her close, wrapping his torn jacket around her, using his own body as a shield against the biting cold that came with Vexus 9's night. Her skin was ice against his heat-scorched skin. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering nonsense words. Names of his sister's stuffed animals, the lyrics to an old Earth lullaby, the name of his favorite coffee shop on Mars. Anything to keep her listening. Anything to keep her from slipping away. He didn't know how long he sat there. Hours? Days? Time had no meaning anymore. The sand shifted beneath them, burying his legs. The wind screamed. Somewhere in the distance, a sand WYRM stirred, its massive body sliding beneath the dunes, drawn by the heat of the burning ship. He didn't care. He was already dead. He just didn't want her to be alone when she joined him. Then, faintly, her fingers moved. Just a twitch. Curl. like a flower reaching for the sun. Tarn gasped. "Hey!" he croaked, his voice raw as gravel. "Hey, princess, don't you dare leave me now. I've carried you this far. You owe me a damn cup of coffee." A shudder passed through her. Her eyelids fluttered. Then, slowly, impossibly, they opened. Her gaze found his, and she didn't look away. Her voice, when it came, was like wind chimes in a storm, soft, broken, but clear. "Why did you save me?" Tarn laughed. Came out as a cough. "Because you're the only thing left that hasn't tried to kill me." She didn't smile. Not then. But her eyes, those impossible, glowing eyes, held his, and in them, he saw something he'd never seen in a soldier's gaze before. Not fear. Not gratitude. Not even awe. Recognition. As if she'd known him before. As if she'd waited. He didn't understand it. He didn't have the energy to try. He just held her tighter as the wind howled and the sand buried them both. They were found 3 days later. A Valeth salvage team, dispatched after the ship's last transmission, traced the heat signature of the crash and the faint biosign of the princess through the dunes. They arrived in a hover-armored convoy, their blue-skinned warriors clad in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, their white hair braided with silver threads that shimmered like captured starlight. They moved with the quiet precision of hunters who had spent centuries mastering the art of death. They found Tarn half buried in sand, his uniform fused to his skin, his legs swollen and blackened, his lips cracked and bleeding. And beside him, lying on his chest like a sleeping child, was Princess Lysara, wrapped in his jacket, her skin now glowing faintly with a soft, internal blue light. Recovery, they called it. The royal healing pulse. A gift of her bloodline. They took her first. They pulled her gently from his arms, and for the first time since the crash, Tarn screamed. Not in pain, in terror. They put a sedative in his fore and carried him away on a stretcher. His eyes locked on Lysara's retreating form, her eyes still on him, wide and unblinking, until the hovergurney vanished into the sandstorm. He woke in a sterile white chamber beneath the royal palace of Vexus 9, a structure carved into the side of a mountain of living crystal, its towers spiraling into the sky like frozen lightning. The air smelled of incense and ozone. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. He was naked except for a thin thermal wrap. His leg had been rebuilt, bone fused with alien nanotech, muscle regrown with accelerated growth serums. He could move it. He could stand. He could walk. But he didn't want to. They told him Lysara was recovering, that she'd been in a coma for 42 hours, that the royal healers said her survival was miraculous, that she'd refused to speak to anyone except the human. Tarn didn't believe them, not until they brought him to her. She was in a garden, suspended in a glass dome filled with mist and floating lanterns that drifted like jellyfish. The plants here were not earthly. They had 6-petaled flowers that hummed when touched, vines that curled around her arms like living bracelets, and trees with bark that shimmered like liquid mercury. She sat on a low stone bench, barefoot, her white hair cascading down her back like a river of moonlight, her skin now glowing with a steady, serene blue. She wore a simple robe of woven light, no crown, no jewels, just her. And she was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, silent tears that fell like dew and vanished before they hit the ground. When she saw him, she stood and walked toward him. No guards followed. No attendants dared to enter. The dome was theirs alone. She stopped 3 paces away, looked up at him, and bowed. Not the polite, formal bow of a princess to a soldier. The full, knee-deep, forehead-to-ground bow of a subject to a savior. Then she rose and spoke. "I owe you my life." Tarn swallowed. His throat was dry. "You don't owe me anything. I just didn't want you to die." She stepped closer. Her eyes held his. "I was afraid. When the fire came, when the ship broke, I thought I was going to die alone. I thought no one would come for me. I thought my father would forget me." Tarn's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. He reached out, then stopped. "I'm not your father." "No," she said softly. "You're the one who carried me through the fire." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy as desert sand. Then, quietly, she asked, "Do you believe in fate, Tarn Vera?" He blinked. "I believe in bullets. And boots. And the guy next to you who doesn't run." She smiled. Just a little. A crack in the ice. "I believe in fate. Because I saw you in my dreams before I met you. You were there. In the dark. Holding me. Just like you did." He stared at her. That's not possible. I know, she said. But it's true. He looked away. I'm not a hero. You are, she whispered. To me. He didn't answer. She didn't press. But from that day on, she came to him. Every morning, just after dawn. When the palace lights turned the crystal towers gold, she would appear at his door. She never spoke first. She just sat beside him while he ate his bland nutrient paste, while he stared out the window at the endless dunes, while he stared at the scar on his leg, the one that still burned when the wind blew just right. She brought him books, ancient Velith poetry written in glowing ink. She brought him music, songs played on instruments made of hollowed bone and singing crystal. She didn't ask him to talk. She didn't ask him to forgive himself. She just sat and listened, and slowly he began to talk. He told her about his sister, Mira, who had died of a lung infection when he was 12 because Earth's medical bots had been too busy fixing rich people's implants to save a soldier's kid. He told her about the time he stole a hoverbike from a military depot just to ride it into the ocean, because he wanted to feel what freedom tasted like. He told her about the woman he'd loved on Mars, Alira, who left him because he was always deployed, because he never knew how to say, I miss you, without sounding like a machine. She listened, always, and when he finished, she would take his hand, cold, smooth, perfect, and press it to her chest. Feel, she would say. He would. And there, beneath her skin, he felt it. A slow, steady pulse. Not just a heartbeat. A song. A memory. Promise. The royal court didn't like it. They didn't like that their last heir was spending her days with a human. A soldier. A mortal. A creature whose blood was thin. Whose bones were brittle. Whose lifespan was a blink in the Velith calendar. They didn't like that she refused to eat the ceremonial moon fruit, that she refused to wear the royal sapphire crown, that she refused to speak to the High Council unless Tarn was present. They didn't like that she had begun to glow brighter when he was near. They didn't like that the palace crystals, which had not sung in 2 centuries, now hummed in harmony with his footsteps. They didn't like that the desert itself seemed to bend toward him. And so, on the 7th moon cycle after the crash, the High Council summoned him. They sat in the Hall of Echoing Thrones, a cavernous chamber lined with statues of past emperors, each carved from a single piece of living stone, their eyes glowing with captured starlight. At the head sat Empress Velitha, Lysara's mother, her skin a deeper blue than her daughter's, her hair braided with strands of actual stardust, her gaze as cold as the void between galaxies. To her right sat the warlord Krydh, a hulking brute with 4 arms and a voice like grinding tectonic plates. To her left sat the Oracle of Whispers, a figure wrapped in veils, their face hidden, their voice a chorus of 1,000 echoes. You are a soldier, Empress Velitha said, her voice like ice cracking over a deep sea. You are not a prince. You are not a noble. You are not even from a world that has survived 1,000 winters. You are a temporary thing, a spark, a breath. And yet, my daughter has chosen you. She chose me because I didn't leave her, Tarn said, standing straight, his legs still aching, his back still scarred, his voice steady. She chose you because she is young, Krydh growled. She has not seen the weight of empire. She has not seen the cost of peace. You are a distraction, a flaw, a wound in the fabric of our lineage. Tarn didn't flinch. I didn't ask to be here. No. The oracle spoke, their voice shifting between male and female, past and future. But you were called. Tarn turned. What? The desert sings your name, the oracle whispered. The sand remembers. The old ones whisper. You are not just a soldier, Tarn Vera. You are the last of the starborn. The one who walks between worlds. The one who was meant to find her. Tarn stared. That's bullshit. The oracle did not react. You were born beneath a dying star. Your mother named you Tarn because it means, the one who carries light. You were sent to escort her because fate did not want her to die alone. You carried her through fire because you were the only one who could. Tarn's breath caught. That's not real. Is it not? Lysara stepped forward from the shadows. She had not been invited. She had not been announced. But she was there. Her robe shimmered with threads of silver and blue, her hair glowing softly. You remember the dreams, don't you? The ones you thought were nightmares? The ones where you were standing on a hill, holding a child, watching a star fall? You didn't know why you cried. You thought it was grief. But it was memory. Tarn's hands trembled. He remembered. He remembered standing on a hill, holding a child with blue skin and white hair. He remembered the sky splitting open. He remembered a voice saying, He will come when the fire rises. He will carry you home. He'd forgotten it. He'd buried it. Now it was all coming back. I didn't know, he whispered. Lysara walked to him, took his hand. I knew. The Empress rose. Enough. The chamber fell silent. All this, she said, is madness, a child's fantasy, a human's delusion. But I will not let my daughter's future be decided by a dream. There is a tradition, the trial of the twin moons, a rite of the ancient Valeth. A warrior must prove their worth, not by strength, not by rank, but by sacrifice. If Tarn Vera wishes to stand beside my daughter, he must survive the trial. Tarn looked at Lysara. She didn't look afraid. She looked proud. What's the trial? He asked. You will enter the heart of Vexus, the Empress said, the oldest desert, where the sand remembers every soul that has ever walked upon it, where the dunes shift with the thoughts of the dead, where no human has ever returned. Tarn nodded. When? Tomorrow. The heart of Vexus was not a place. It was a feeling. It was a memory made real. The desert there had no horizon. The dunes rose like frozen waves, each one taller than a cathedral, each one humming with a low, mournful tone. The air shimmered with heat, but the wind carried the scent of rain that had never fallen. The sand beneath Tarn's boots wasn't sand at all. It was ground-up bone, crushed crystal, and the dust of forgotten civilizations. He walked alone, barefoot, wearing only a simple tunic woven from the light of Lysara's hair. He carried nothing, no weapon, no water, no suit, just himself. And behind him, watching from a cliff of obsidian, stood Lysara. She had not been allowed to follow, but she was there, and he knew it. The first trial came at dusk. The dunes began to move, not with wind, with thought. They remembered the dead, and they wanted him to join them. Shadows formed from the sand, figures of soldiers, of children, of kings who had died on this desert, their faces twisted in agony, their voices whispering in 100 tongues. They reached for him. They begged him to rest, to lie down, to let go. He kept walking. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just walked. The second trial came at midnight. The sand turned to glass beneath his feet. He stepped on it and the glass cracked, revealing the faces of the people he had failed. His sister, Alira, the men and women under his command who had died because he was too slow, too quiet, too afraid to speak up. They screamed his name. He didn't stop. He kept walking. The third trial came at dawn. The sky split open, and a voice, ancient and vast, echoed from the heavens. Why did you save her? Tarn stopped. He looked up. He didn't answer right away. He thought of the fire, of the way she'd looked at him when she woke, of the way her hand felt in his, of the way the desert had sung when he touched her. He thought of all the things he'd never said. And then he whispered, because I didn't want to be alone anymore. The voice fell silent. The dunes stilled. The sky closed. And the sand beneath his feet began to glow. Not with heat, with light. A soft, golden-blue radiance, rising from the ground, wrapping around his legs, his waist, his chest, until he was standing in the center of a circle of light, his body glowing as brightly as Lysara's. The desert bowed, and the voice spoke again. Then you are worthy. He walked back to the palace at noon. The guards didn't stop him. The court didn't dare speak. The Empress stood at the top of the crystal stairs, her face unreadable. Lysara ran down them. She didn't care about protocol. She didn't care about dignity. She threw herself into his arms and held him so tightly, he thought his ribs might crack. You did it, she whispered, her voice trembling. You came back. He held her, his forehead against hers, his tears mixing with hers. I told you I wouldn't leave you. She pulled back, her eyes shining. I didn't want to marry you because you saved me. He frowned. Then why? I wanted to marry you, she said, her voice suddenly strong, clear, radiant. Because you didn't ask me to be anything but myself. The court gasped. The Empress stepped forward. And then, for the first time in 300 years, she knelt. Before a human. Before a soldier. Before a man who had carried her daughter through fire. I was wrong, she said, her voice quiet, trembling. I thought love was weakness. I thought loyalty was a chain. But you carried her through death. And you didn't ask for power. You didn't ask for glory. You only asked for her. She reached out and placed her hand on Tarn's chest. And for the first time he felt it, the pulse. Not just in Lysara, in himself, a warmth, a song, a belonging. You are not a soldier, the Empress said. You are the Starborn, the bridge, the one who walks between worlds. And now you are family. Lysara stepped forward. She took Tarn's hand. And then, in front of the entire court, before the ancient statues and the glowing dunes and the twin moons that had watched over this world since time began, she dropped to her knees. And she asked, Tarn Vera, she said, her voice ringing like a bell across the desert. Will you marry me? The silence was absolute. The wind held its breath. The sand stopped humming. Tarn looked down at her, her glowing skin, her tear-streaked face, her eyes that held the whole of the galaxy. He didn't answer with words. He knelt beside her and kissed her forehead. Then he took her hand and placed it over his heart. I've been waiting for you, he said, his voice thick with tears, even when I didn't know it. She smiled, and the palace sang. The crystal towers lit up with 1,000 colors. The desert bloomed with flowers that had not grown in 1,000 years. And high above, the twin moons aligned, for the first time in recorded history, and poured their light down upon them like a blessing. They were married that night, beneath the open sky, with no priest, no robes, no ceremony. Just the wind, the sand, the stars, and the quiet, perfect understanding that some bonds are not made in courts or crowns. They are made in fire, and carried through the dark, by hands that refuse to let go. They lived in the palace but not as rulers, not as conquerors, as keepers. Tarn learned to speak Valeth, not with words, but with touch. Lysara learned to laugh at earth jokes, even the ones about coffee that didn't taste like mud. She taught him how to sing to the dunes, and he taught her how to make pancakes with synthetic syrup and call them breakfast. They walked the desert together every morning, hand in hand, barefoot, watching the sun rise over the dunes, the sand glowing beneath them like scattered stars. The court still whispered, but now they whispered in awe, because when Tarn walked through the halls, the walls glowed. When Lysara smiled, the flowers bloomed, and when they held each other at night, the twin moons outside their window pulsed in rhythm with their hearts. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the crash, they stood on the highest balcony, watching the sandstorms roll in like waves of gold. Lysara leaned her head on his shoulder. I still don't understand, she murmured. Why you? He looked down at her, at the way her hair caught the moonlight, at the way her skin glowed like a living jewel. I didn't save you because you were a princess, he said. I saved you because you were the only thing in that burning ship that felt like home. She turned to him, her eyes bright. Then I'm glad I was a mess, she whispered. He laughed. Real, deep, warm, and pulled her close. And for the first time since the fire, neither of them felt alone. Not ever again. The first time the desert cried. Tarn didn't realize it was happening. It was early morning, just after the third moon had dipped below the dunes, and Lysara had dragged him out to the Whispering Ridge, a place where the wind didn't howl, but hummed low and sweet, like a lullaby sung by something ancient and tender. She had insisted he come. You need to hear it, she said, her voice softer than the sand beneath their feet. It remembers you now. He didn't believe her, until the first drop fell. It landed on his forearm, cool, heavy, shimmering like liquid silver. He looked up. The sky was clear. No clouds, no storm, just the twin moons, still hanging low, and the endless, silent dunes. Then another drop, and another. They fell in slow, deliberate patterns, not random like rain, but rhythmic, like notes, like a song. Lysara didn't move. She just stood there, eyes closed, arms outstretched, letting the droplets kiss her skin. When she opened her eyes, they were wet, not with tears, but with something deeper, something older. They're remembering, she whispered. Tarn wiped a drop from his cheek. It didn't evaporate. It lingered, glowing faintly blue before dissolving into his skin like ink into paper. A warmth spread through him. Not heat, not pain, but the quiet certainty of being known. What is this? He asked. The desert doesn't just remember the dead, she said, her voice barely above a breath. It remembers the ones who change it. He looked down at his hand. The spot where the drop had landed was faintly luminous, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. That night he dreamed, not of fire, not of screams, of a child blue-skinned, white-haired, standing on a hill under a sky full of falling stars, holding a tiny, glowing seed. The child turned to him. Not Lysara, not exactly, but her, older, Younger. The same eyes. The same soul. You carried me when I was broken, the child said. Now carry me when I am whole. He woke with a gasp. Lysara was beside him, watching him. Her skin glowed, not with the soft blue of before, but with a deeper golden light, like dawn trapped beneath glass. You heard it too, she said. He didn't ask how she knew. He just nodded. They didn't speak of it again. But after that, the desert changed. Flowers bloomed where he stepped. Petals shaped like wings, humming with the same tune the wind had sung on the ridge. Sand patterns formed overnight, swirling into symbols he didn't recognize but somehow felt, like the shape of a hand holding a heart, or a star being born inside a wave. The palace crystals began to sing when he entered a room, not in harmony, but in response, as if they were answering a question he hadn't asked. And Lysara, she changed too, not in appearance, not in voice, but in presence. She stopped trying to be the princess. She started being herself. She stole Tarn's old earth socks and wore them to bed, giggling when they slipped off her toes. She tried to teach the palace chefs how to make pancakes with syrup, which ended with a sticky, golden mess covering half the kitchen and 3 startled attendants. She laughed, loud, unfiltered, joyous, until the crystal ceilings trembled with the sound. One evening, she found him sitting alone on the balcony, staring at the horizon where the dunes met the sky. You're thinking about leaving, she said. He didn't turn. I'm thinking about what happens when I die. She sat beside him, not close, not distant, just there. You're not going to die, she said. Everyone does. Not you. He finally looked at her. Why not? She reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. Because you're not just human anymore. He frowned. What does that mean? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took his hand and pressed it to her own chest. Her pulse was there, steady, strong, glowing. But beneath it, there was another, slower, deeper, older, like a second heartbeat, hidden beneath the first. Tarn froze. That's mine, he whispered. She nodded. It's been there since the fire, since you carried me. You didn't just save my life. You let me save yours. He pulled his hand back, shaken. I don't understand. You don't have to, she said. But you're becoming part of this world. Not as a guest, not as a soldier, as a root. The desert doesn't accept outsiders. It only accepts those who give themselves to it. And you gave yourself to me. He looked away, his throat tight. I didn't mean to. Neither did I, she said softly. But here we are. The first real twist came when the Oracle of Whispers returned. Not in the veiled, echoing form of before, but as a woman, young, human, with dark skin, dark eyes, and hair like spun night. She stood in the garden at twilight, barefoot, wearing a simple tunic of woven moonlight, holding a single flower that bloomed with every breath she took. Lysara froze. Tarn didn't move. The oracle, no, the woman, smiled. You didn't think I'd forget you, did you? She said, her voice warm, familiar, achingly human. Tarn's breath caught. He knew her. Not from this life. Not from this world. From the dreams. From the hill. From the falling stars. Alira? He whispered. The woman Alira nodded. You died on Mars, he said, voice cracking. I was deployed. I didn't make it back in time. I know, she said. I waited. For you. Not in death. In memory. The desert holds more than bones, Tarn. It holds echoes of hearts that loved too deeply to let go. I was one. And you were the other. Lysara stepped forward, her glow dimming slightly, her voice quiet. You're my mother. Alira turned to her, tears in her eyes. I was. Before I became the oracle. Before I gave my light to the desert so you could be born. Tarn staggered back. That's impossible. You died before she was born. She did, Alira said. But love doesn't obey time. It bends it, breaks it, rebuilds it. I didn't die. I became. And when the starborn came, I was waiting. I knew you'd find her. I knew you'd carry her through fire. Tarn looked at Lysara. You knew. Lysara looked down. I felt her. In my dreams. Sometimes when I was small, I'd wake up crying, and my mother would hold me and say, she's coming. The one who carries the light. I thought it was just a story. Until you came. Tarn's legs gave out. He sank to his knees. He had spent his whole life believing he was alone. That love was something you lost. That grief was final. But here was Alira, alive, not in flesh, but in spirit. Here was Lysara, not just a princess, but a daughter of two worlds. And here was he, not a soldier, not a hero, not even a man anymore. He was the bridge, the anchor, the living thread between memory and miracle. Alira knelt beside him, took his hand, and pressed it to her chest. Her heartbeat was steady, and beneath it, his own, the second pulse. "I didn't come to take you away," she said. "I came to remind you, you were never meant to be alone. Not then, not now, not ever." He didn't cry, not then. But when she vanished, dissolving into the wind like mist, her flower blooming one last time before turning to dust, the desert sang louder than ever before, and Lysara held him, not as a princess, not as a savior, but as a woman who had lost everything, and found everything, in him. The second twist came from the warlord Kryth. He had watched, he had waited, he had hated, and now he struck, not with armies, not with weapons, with truth. He came to the palace at midnight, clad in armor black as the void between stars, his 4 arms trembling. Not with rage, but with grief. He didn't speak. He just placed a single object on the floor between them. A locket, old, human, engraved with a name, Mira Vera, Tarn's sister, his little sister, the one who died, the one he'd buried in silence. He picked it up with shaking hands. The locket opened. Inside was a tiny photo. Mira, age 7, grinning, holding a stuffed rabbit made of cloth and thread. And on the back, written in faded ink, "I'll wait for you, Tarn, even if you forget me." Kryth spoke, his voice raw, stripped of its usual thunder. "I was there." Tarn froze. "You were what?" "I was the soldier who found her body," Kryth said. "I was the one who carried her to the medbay. I was the one who saw her eyes close. And I was the one who saw the name on your dog tag." Tarn's throat closed. You knew." "I knew," Kryth said. "I knew you were broken. I knew you didn't cry because you thought crying was weakness. I knew you never talked about her because you thought if you did, you'd lose her again." He stepped closer. "I hated you because you were human, because you were weak, because you didn't belong." He paused. Then his voice cracked. "But when I saw you crawl through that fire for her, I realized you weren't weak." Tarn stared at him. "You were the strongest man I've ever seen." Kryth dropped to one knee. Not in submission, in reverence. "I don't know what you are now," he said. "But I know this, you saved my princess. And you gave me back my faith in something bigger than power." He placed his forehead to the ground. "I serve you now, Starborn." Tarn didn't speak. He just reached out and pulled Kryth to his feet. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. But from that night on, the warlord walked beside Tarn everywhere. Not as a guard, not as a warrior, but as a brother. And when Tarn dreamed again, he no longer saw the hill. He saw Mira, smiling, holding his hand, and saying, "I knew you'd find her." The third twist came from the Empress. Not in anger, not in command, but in surrender. One morning, she entered the garden alone. She wore no crown, no robes, just a simple tunic the color of twilight. She sat beside Lysara and Tarn on the stone bench. "I've spent my life trying to control fate," she said, her voice quieter than Tarn had ever heard it. "I thought if I kept the line pure, if I kept the blood strong, if I kept the world orderly, then I could protect us from chaos." She looked at Lysara. "You are chaos." Lysara blinked. "Yes," the Empress said. "And you are beautiful." She turned to Tarn. "And you are the reason she became chaos." She reached out and placed her hand on his. Her skin was cold, but beneath it, a pulse, faint, familiar, the same pulse, the same song. Tarn's breath caught. You felt it too," he whispered. The Empress smiled. A real smile, the first he'd ever seen. "I felt it when you carried her through the fire. I felt it when the desert sang. I felt it when you made my daughter laugh." She closed her eyes. "I was afraid." Tarn didn't speak. She didn't need him to. "I thought love was a weakness," she said. "But now I see it's the only thing that keeps us alive." She stood and walked away. But before she vanished into the palace halls, she turned and whispered, "Welcome home, son." Tarn didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He just took Lysara's hand and squeezed. The bond between them grew not in grand gestures, but in quiet, sacred moments. He taught her how to tie her boots. She taught him how to listen to the wind. He burned his hand on a hot stove trying to make her earth toast. She healed it with a touch, and then kissed his palm, giggling like a child. He cried when he found a photo of Mira in his old pack, tucked behind a false panel. She didn't say a word. She just sat beside him on the floor, her head on his shoulder, until the tears stopped. She had nightmares of fire, of falling, of being alone. He held her through them, whispering stories of Earth, of snowmen made of dust, of streetlights that blinked like fireflies, of dogs that barked at clouds. One night, she woke screaming, not from fear, from joy. She sat up, eyes wide, glowing brighter than ever. "I remember," she breathed. He held her. "Remember what?" "I remember the hill," she said. "The stars falling, the child holding the seed. I was there, before I was born. And you were holding me." He stared at her. "You were there?" he whispered. She nodded. "And I chose you, even then, even before I knew your name." He pulled her close, and for the first time he didn't feel like a man carrying a burden. He felt like a man who had finally come home. The desert knew. The palace knew. Even the sand knew. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to, because every morning, when the first light touched the dunes, Tarn and Lasara walked together, hand in hand, barefoot, glowing, and when they passed, the flowers bloomed, the wind sang, and the twin moons, for the first time in recorded history, rose not as rivals, but as one, together, always, and they were not waiting for the next battle. They were already living the ending, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs.